Welcome to Migrating Active Directory to Windows Server 2012. My name's Andrew McMurray and I'm a Technical Evangelist for Microsoft Corporation. This video is going to focus on migrating a mixed Active Directory consisting of Windows Server 2003 R2 and Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controllers to Windows Server 2012. A process for establishing new 2012 DCs, moving Forest single master operations roles, and decommissioning and upgrading DCs is shown, resulting in a pure Windows Server 2012 AD at a functional level of Windows Server 2012. The first thing we need to do in our mixed environment is to get a new domain controller running Windows Server 2012 into our environment, and we'll initially use the new version of Server Manager to do so. The new version of Server Manager is built entirely on PowerShell, and we'll see the results of this as we go along. Even though DC Promo has now been deprecated, we'll be asked many of the same questions in the new Active Directory configuration wizard, and our responses are being converted into PowerShell commands underneath. Once the wizard completes, we'll be able to extract our PowerShell scripts for later reuse. So what I'm going to do now is choose to do an add and manage features. I'm going to do a role-based or feature-based installation here on the current machine, which we've named DC3. I'm installing the Active Directory domain services binaries now and adding in the supporting files. And once I've done that, I'll simply click the next button. And I won't require any extra features at this particular point, so I'll just move forward and allow that to install. Of course, best practice telling us that we will restart automatically if we need to. In this case, we won't need to do that. All we're really doing here is just adding the binaries for Active Directory to our proposed domain controller. Once this installation completes, we'll be given the opportunity to promote this server into a domain controller. Just reiterating that this environment at the moment currently has a Server 2003 R2 DC hosting all of our FSMO roles and a Windows Server 2008 R2 DC. Currently this machine, DC3, running Windows Server 2012 is a member server, and we'll be adding this in as an extra domain controller. At this stage we haven't run any forest prep or domain prep actions, and the new DC Promo wizard will allow us to do that automatically as part of the installation, which is really good because it means I don't forget to do those things, and also it means I don't have to keep removing myself from the promotion wizard and performing those outside of that. As you can see, we're now being asked to promote this server to a domain controller, so we simply click the link within that wizard and that will fire up the Active Directory Domain Services configuration wizard. In this page, standard questions being asked. I'm adding to an existing domain and now providing credentials that I'll use to add this particular server to the domain. You'll notice that this wizard is now very streamlined and also gives us the ability to provide a whole bunch of extra capabilities around the promotion of the server. You'll see here that according to best practice, we'll automatically configure this server as a DNS server as well as a global catalog, and these learnings come from the last 12 years of production Active Directory deployments, taking all of those Microsoft best practices and putting them directly into the wizard. Notice we have the ability to choose the site we're connecting to, and I'm also now putting in the Directory Services Restore Mode password. We'll move past our DNS delegation capabilities. Here we can see we have the ability to replicate from a specific domain controller, choose the paths for our Active Directory domain controller, and you can see here we can export everything we've done into a PowerShell script for later reuse. What we'll now do is we'll hit the next button, and one of the other great features of DC Promo is that it now performs quite an extensive list of prerequisite checks so that we don't attempt to install a domain controller into a domain where we're going to fail that particular promotion. You'll see here it's found a bunch of problems, none of which are critical, telling us we've passed prerequisite checks, and now we're moving into the installation phase. Notice now it mentions that we're upgrading the forest, and it will then upgrade the domain after that, and this is where we're taking those critical forest prep and domain prep operations that previously used to be part of the AD prep tool, and we're executing those automatically. In the past, we would have failed out completely, and I would have had to then go and run those particular tools in the domain and on the schema master for the forest to extend the schema, and then I would have to go back through the configuration wizard all over again and continue it on from there. So we're basically dealing with that within that single wizard now. You can see here it's now warning me the standard warning about NT4 permissions, and that's a warning that we've seen for the last probably almost 10 years now in the Active Directory wizard. You can see it's doing the DNS installation, waiting for that to finish and start up, and also putting on the group policy management console. So all of the things that we've been used to DC Promo doing in the past, we're still capturing here. Not to forget that PowerShell capability underneath. What we're actually doing here is we're converting everything that we put into that wizard into a set of PowerShell commands, and we're executing that in the background. Even though DC Promo is still available on Windows Server 2012, it has been deprecated, and we can expect that to be removed in the next version of Windows. You can now see that it's configuring the DNS server for this particular computer, making sure that it's set to start automatically, and also ensuring that we have added ourselves in. And now it's going to reboot this particular machine and bring it back up as a domain controller. On reboot, Server Manager will start back up again automatically. And now we can prove that this server is into the domain as a new domain controller. What we'll do is we'll open up the new Active Directory Administrative Center tool and check the domain controller's organizational unit in Active Directory. As you can see, this now is a new modern app style interface for Active Directory Administrative Center. Everything being done in this particular tool, again, is being converted to PowerShell and executed underneath. Okay, we'll expand the domain now, and in the domain controllers OU, we can now see DC3 has been created as a domain controller. We'll now move all of our single master operations roles from DC1 to the new DC3, and we will do that by utilizing NTDS util via the command line. We're on the start screen of DC3 now, just running the command line as an administrator. I'll go into NTDS util, use the roles command to change to the roles maintenance section of NTDS util, and then bind ourselves to the Active Directory currently running on DC3. What I will then do is execute a series of transfer commands for each of the Forest Single Master Operations roles to move them from the current server, DC1, which is running Windows Server 2003 R2, to DC3, which is of course running Server 2012. We're doing this in preparation for removing our old 2003 R2 DC from the Forest. So in a staged migration scenario, what we could do after having moved all of these roles to our Windows Server 2012 box is to demote the Server 2003 R2 machine, then move our Forest and domain functional levels to 2008 R2 if we wanted to take advantage of any of those particular features during our period of coexistence. As you can see, all of our roles have now been transferred, and we're ready to demote our 2003 R2 domain controller. Now that our FSMO roles have been moved to our Windows Server 2012 DC, it's now time to remove the Windows Server 2003 R2 domain controller from our domain so that we can potentially move to a Windows Server 2008 domain and Forest functional level prior to moving to 2012. As you can see, we are simply putting in now the password that we want to use for the local administrator account after we demote this particular domain controller. This domain controller will become a member server in our domain, and once it is a member server, we can then choose to move it out into a work group and decommission the server completely. As you can see, initially what will happen is we will continue to do any remaining replication updates that need to be done to our replication partners, and then the demotion of the domain controller will occur. We've sped the process up slightly. It does take a little longer than this, and you can see that it's now completing the demotion for the directory service, the security accounts manager, and the local security authority, bringing our machine back to a member server. After this is complete, if I so choose, I can go into Active Directory Administrative Center and move my forest and domain functional level to Windows Server 2008 R2, and this would allow me to take advantage of some new features before completely moving across to a Windows Server 2012 domain and forest functional level. We're now complete. We now move to our Windows Server 2008 R2 machine, being our DC2 machine, and we're going to initiate an in-place upgrade to Windows Server 2012. This will take our existing domain controller running Windows Server 2008 R2 and make it into a domain controller running Windows Server 2012. As you can see, the upgrade procedure is very similar to that of a base install. We're choosing to install a server with a GUI in this instance, although we could have been running our domain controller on a server core installation if we so choose. In an upgrade scenario, we will do a compatibility check first to ensure that there are no applications running on the Windows Server 2008 machine that could cause a problem. Once we've looked at that and we're happy that we don't have any issues, we can then move forward into the installation itself. We felt you probably didn't want to sit through 20 minutes of progress bar here, so we have moved the installation forward quite quickly. As you can see, we go through moving all of our files to windows.old, putting the new files down, rebooting. Upon the upgrade, what we can now do is go into Active Directory Administrative Center and move our domain and forest functional level across to Windows Server 2012, as we no longer have any domain controllers other than Windows Server 2012 domain controllers in the environment. You can see there we've moved the forest functional level. We now move the domain functional level, and once this is complete, we now have the ability to take advantage of all of the new features that require the Windows Server 2012 schema. Now that our forest is at a level of Windows Server 2012 and we have nothing but Windows Server 2012 DCs left, let's add a new domain controller using PowerShell rather than the wizard. As you can see, we can execute and install Windows feature commandlet here, which will then go and install the Active Directory Domain Services binaries on our DC4 machine. Once this is complete, we can execute and install ADDS domain controller script. It will ask us to authenticate and will also ask us for any information required at runtime, such as the Directory Services Restore Mode password. As you can see here, we're typing in our Directory Services Restore Mode password, known as the Safe Mode Administrator password in PowerShell. And you can see, very similar to our previous wizard, some information as to the progress of this particular installation. You can see here that we have done all of our tests to ensure that our prerequisites are in place. And it's giving us those standard warnings that we saw in the wizard earlier, such as delegation for DNS server records, as well as warnings around security for NT4 machines. We can see now that we're determining our replication source DC, and from that point on, we are replicating all of the 3 partitions of Active Directory that needs to be in place on this Windows Server 2012 domain controller. So you can see quite clearly here that there are a number of different deployment methods that we can now execute in the installation of a domain controller in a Windows Server 2012 forest, or Windows Server 2012 operating system, we should say. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. We now have a domain and a forest that is fully Windows Server 2012. If we just refresh our domain controllers, you'll see we're all complete. Thanks for watching.